students, welcome to Tarunayas. Today we will be discussing editorials from the Hindu and Indian Express of 22nd of October 2022. So let's start with the editorial. So I have taken this editorial from the Indian Express titled Not Hindi or English. You can relate this article with General Studies paper 2, that is government policies and issues arising out of their design and implementation. The topic is basically the language issue. Now, if I talk about the context of this article, then there are three important contexts. The first, that there is always a debate around the language in India, that whether there should be a national language or in India, or if there is a national language, what national language it would be, and whether there should be an officially recognized language in India. So these are certain points which are always in the debate. However, if I consider the three important contexts, then the first one is the parliamentary report that was presented on promoting Hindi as a language, and which has always been resisted by the southern states. And recently there is also an inclusion of the Hindi textbooks in MBBS courses in Madhya Pradesh, and also Prime Minister gave special emphasis on promoting Hindi language. Now let's talk about the provisions before we get into the details of the language and the points that that the writer raises. Let us first know the constitutional provisions that are given with respect to the languages, and then we will also talk in brief about the language issue in India and ever since independence. So the first point is, and I am sorry, please don't mind, I have a bit hoarseness in my throat and also blocked nose. So the first provision that is given in the Constitution is Article 29. Now this Article 29 basically, it protects the interests of minorities. It protects the interests of minorities. However, a point to be noted, that this article does not mention any religious minority or what kind of minority it should be. Rather, this article mentions a term which is known as mention the term, a phrase, that is section of the citizens. Section of the citizen. That means any section of the citizen in India who have a distinct language, script or culture of its own shall have the right to conserve the same. The another article is 343. Now what does this article says? It talks about the official language of Union of India. Official language of Union of India. Alright. The article is talking about the official language, which says, according to this article, Hindi, according to this article, it is Hindi written in Devanagari script. Written in Devanagari script and numerals shall be the official language of India. Now this article also states that English will continue to be used as official language for 15 years. Now English will be used as official language for 15 years. However, we know that English, the usage of English as an official language has been extended by the Official Language Act of 1968, by the Official Language Act of 1968. Alright, we will also talk about the three language formula that was recommended by the Kothari committee. Alright, so now these are the basic things about the language in India. There is one more article. I think so far it is clear. Let me raise this now. There is one more article, that is Article 347. Now this article, it gives President the power to recognize a language as an official language of a given state. Now this article gives power to the President to recognize a language as an official language of a state. All right, now here the president is empowered. All right, the article 346, so we were talking about article 347, which gives power to the president to recognize any language as an official language of a given state. Now this article it gives power to the president. We were talking about article 346. All right, so article 346 talks about the official language of communication, between union and state, states, and between states. All right, so this is what the article says. Article 346 we have talked about. We talked about article 343. We spoke of article 29, which protects the interest of the section of citizens. Now we are going to look into another important article, which is article 350A. Now this article is important here, particularly in the context of this article that I am going to discuss subsequently. So this article talks about facilitation. Facilities are to be created by the state in order to provide instruction in the mother tongue at the primary stage. That means the state is obligated to provide the facilities for instruction in mother tongue. All right, so far so clear. And this is article 350, which provides for the post of linguistic officer to protect the interest of the linguistic minorities. And also article 351 talks about promoting Hindi as a language. Article 351 talks about, it gives power to the union government to issue directive for the development of the Hindi language. All right, so how many articles in the constitution are related with the language? We will just count them, starting with the article 29. Then we talked about the article 343. Then we spoke of the article 346. Then we talked about the article 347. Then we talked about article 350A, article 350B. Then we talked about article 351. So these articles you have to remember whenever the issue of the language is discussed, and especially the issue of the national language, official language. So you must remember the article. Which article? Article 346, which speaks about the official language, and article 343. These two articles are important articles. All right, now let us, and we have got the eighth schedule too. All right, there are 22 languages which are recognized as the scheduled languages. All right, now let us move on to the arguments. Now, so far we discussed the constitutional provisions related with the language in India. Now, what is basically the debate? Now, the debate is this particular article, which gives power to the union government to promote development of Hindi as a language, and also the article 343, which speaks about the Hindi as an official language. However, there has been a consistent protest from the southern states who consider this move as imposition of Hindi on them, right? Hindi on them. So in this context, in the 1960s, an act was passed which is known as the Official Language Act of 1968. This act basically gave the power to the state governments to recognize an official language, I mean that the language that can be used officially in the state. However, if we consider the diversity, the linguistic diversity of India, there is no one language, and within the state also there are other languages. So if I consider the state of Karnataka, then Kannada is not the only language spoken there. There is Kodavu language that is spoken, and there may be other languages spoken by the scheduled tribes. Similarly, in the state of Tamil Nadu, in the state of Madhya Pradesh, in the state of Chhattisgarh and Odisha, there is no one language. However, there is a language which is spoken by the majority of the people in the state and in majority of the people in India. Alright, so that the language spoken by the people in India would depend upon that how the language has progressed since independence, how that language is being used in the official matter, and how that language has become the language of knowledge, or the language, whether that language opens up the frontiers of knowledge and information or not. Now this is a particular issue that the writer has highlighted in his article. Let's move on to the article now. So context we discussed the constitutional provision. Now let's see the concerns which have been raised by the writer. The first thing that the writer says, it is actually not the imposition of the Hindi that is the major concern. The major concern, according to the writer, is the status of the vernacular languages, which are usually relegated below English. Alright, according to the writer, it's not basically the imposition of any language or particularly Hindi. It is rather the hierarchy which is developed in the languages, that which language is more superior. English speaking people would consider them as superior over other language speakers, such as regional languages and vernacular languages. Alright, so this is the point of concern raised by the writer. The writer says the anomaly of the political experiments such as these is not about the accommodation of the language. It is about the accommodation that comes with the hierarchy. So this is what the writer wants to say. Writer says that English language has been the language of knowledge and access to privileges. Now, for the development of any language, there should be a literature of that language present. If there should be people who speak that language, there should be academicians who are working in that language, who are working for the development of that language. There should be a process of translating books from that language to other language, and from other language to that particular language. So there is a whole process, there is a whole procedure which is followed when it comes to recognizing a language, when it comes to developing that particular language. So the writer is talking about the hierarchy which is followed in India. Now let us consider the example of English, which the writer has taken as a language of knowledge. Majority of the works, whether it is the physiology, medicine, whether it is literature, or any work that is done in any part of the globe, in any part of India, is translated in that language. If you know English, you can access to everything that has so far been discovered by humanity. So that is the reason why writer is saying that English has been considered as the language of knowledge, because it opens up the different frontiers. However, if we consider the vernacular language, there is no enough development, and that is the reason why the writer says there is a hierarchy which develops. So there is no imposition per se, but rather it is the accommodation of the languages according to the hierarchy. Writer says that the vernacular language has been confined to the cultural identity and a marker as a second-class citizens. Alright. The challenge of Hindi is that it closes off the frontiers of knowledge. If we consider any resource material for any competitive exams also, there is a lack of material which is available, genuine material which is available in Hindi language. So according to the writer, the challenge of the Hindi language the challenge that Hindi language faces, this is what the writer wants to say, that it closes off the frontiers of knowledge, not just in science but also in the civic knowledge and higher echelons of law. It is the claim that language, self identity, and culture be different from the language of knowledge, privilege, and access. Now, the writer wants to raise this concern that there has developed a culture which says that there is a language of identity and culture, and there is a language of knowledge. Now, English is particularly used in official, in offices and in other work. Now this has become a language of knowledge. Now you can get access to many repositories, you can get access to any work that you want to have and learn. However, Hindi, Sanskrit, other regional languages and vernacular language, they have been confined to the space, to the cultural space, to the identity space, but they have not evolved. Or rather, there has been a slow development when it comes to evolving these languages and developing these languages as the language of knowledge. Right, so this is what the writer wants to say, that there has been a culture which divides the language, between the language of the culture and between the language that is used for the purpose of gaining knowledge. So, and this division of the language, the writer would further say, divides the people. So there develops a hierarchy amongst the languages. So the writer says that it is the untapped resentment of Hindi culture that often is made conscious, alright, of its own second class status in global hierarchy, not just in India, but if we consider the languages of India on the globe, then we have not worked enough to get them global recognition. Millions of vernacular speakers, they feel disenfranchised. They feel what? They feel disenfranchised. This is what the writer wants to say. That the writer basically is talking about the development of the language. Writer has not dealt into the politics that is related with the language. Writer is not talking about whether there is Hindi imposition or not. Writer is basically talking about the gist of the article is that the development of the language, whether it is Hindi, a regional language, or it is any other language. So the main point of the writer revolves around the development of the language. So the writer says that it is basically the failure of the state, that the two language formula which was devised is only a superficial bilingualism, because a person is not fluent and proficient enough to read, write and produce in both the languages. One language is always preferred more. So if a person knows Hindi and English, the person would be sufficient, the person would be proficient in either of the language, not in both the language. So this is what the writer wants to say, that it is a superficial bilingualism. Many of the people, this is the example that the writer is giving, that many of the people who speak two languages, they cannot operate in two languages at the frontiers of knowledge. One language is always, a person is more proficient in one of the languages that he or she may know. The writer has given the example of Sanskrit. Now if we consider Sanskrit, that yes, Sanskrit is taught in school, but those who appear for examination in Sanskrit, they are not competent enough to reproduce in that language. They are not competent enough to read and write in that language. It is only and only it remains, or you can say the Sanskrit in school has remained to the level of passing the exam. To the level of passing the exam. Alright. The writer raises concern with respect to the obscurity in translation. So whether it is Hindi, vernacular, or it is any other regional language, so there is obscurity in the translation. The translations are not done properly. Like I talked about earlier, the division of the function of the language. Or what is the function of the language? The language is a marker of ethnicity. So the function of language is either it becomes the language of the knowledge, like English in India, and it will be wrong to recognize English as a foreign language, right? Because English has now become, according to the writer, English has now become a language in India. It is also considered as the connecting language. Many Dalits scholars and Dalits consider English language as a language of emancipation. A language of emancipation. So the function of language divides the people, and Hindi speaking people are there left stranded. So like I said, the Dalits have valorized English as a sign of emancipation. The difference in language limits the prospect of people divided by the division and hierarchy among the languages. So the prospects of people are limited. If we want to develop a language, we must connect this language, whether it is Hindi, vernacular, regional, whatever the language. If we want to develop a language, we must connect it as a language of knowledge, also as a language of culture, identity. So there are many frontiers on which we will have to work if we want to develop a particular language. So there cannot be division of the function of the language. That for example, many people, they speak their native or their mother tongue at home, but when they go to the public spaces, offices, school, other institutions, public organization, they speak the language, either it will be English if they are in India, or they are in the European nation, or in USA, they are speaking English. If they are in China, they are speaking Chinese. So this is what the writer wants to say. So there is a division of the language. If I speak in the particular, in the context of India, then there exists a division in the language. The language spoken at home is not the same language spoken in the public institution or in the public sphere. So this is what the writer wants to say. All right. The writer is also talking about that English is an Indian language now. It cannot be exercised as a foreign language, which will be a gross mistake. However, English should not relegate the vernacular languages, because even the vernacular scholars, they consider vernacular languages as a cultural language, which confines it to the language of past, and it does not become the language of future. So in order to develop a language, it should be considered as the language of future. Then only we would be able to work on it and on its development. So this is what the writer, these are certain points that you can take out from this article and use when it comes to the language issue, that how the language is divided and how the language divides the people, etc., like this. So they are language of popular culture and not that of high knowledge. So the writer talks about, does the language question is faded then? Like if we go into the debate like this, so will the language question be faded? The first thing is, the writer says Hindi should not be imposed. English should not be treated as a foreign language or a marker of colonialism. The status of vernacular needs to be defined. Does the derive for vernacular permanently relegates it to the second class status? So basically, if I conclude, then the writer says the discussion on the language should be pedagogical. The writer is saying the discussion on the language should be pedagogical and not the political. The vernacular language need to be developed as language of knowledge with creative pedagogy. We can only with the creative pedagogy we can reclaim the heritage. So that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Tarun IAS.